your body into quadrants. All right, so here's how we're going to do it. We're going to divide it right about here. So we're going to divide kind of the trunk from the lower body. Okay? We're going to divide probably about middle of the neck. That's another area we can do. Okay? We can actually divide probably the lower part of the neck too. Okay? Now, I don't expect you to do that. I didn't even expect you to know that. But these are some of the patterns that we have found over the years. Okay? All right. We can also just draw the line. So this is the center of gravity line. Remember how everybody has a center of gravity? It's supposed to go down. It probably isn't going to line up with what it should. Remember how that line of gravity? All right, that's the slide you actually have. You see that big red line? That's supposed to be the center of gravity line. This guy doesn't have absolutely perfect posture. Okay, remember it's supposed to go down through the external auditory meatus, down through the acromions, just behind the cervical, right in front of the thoracic. It's supposed to go down through S2, and that my picture, it does not go through S2. Looks like it goes through L2. Okay, my drawing is not perfect. It goes just behind the greater trochanter, just in front of the half line of the patella, or the knee, and then just in front of the malleoli. Okay, so based on this drawing, we have quadrants. Can you see it? Here's a quadrant, here's a quadrant, here's one, and here's what I'm telling you. This quadrant, we're going to call it quadrant, I don't know, the lower quadrant 1. This would be lower quadrant 1. Muscles in this quadrant, which we're going to put on here in just a second, and muscles in that quadrant will function together, which means they have a similar position. Your posture is related to the status of these muscles and those muscles. We have a quadrant over here. Lower quadrant 2, lower quadrant 2. Those muscles that are located there are going to have a similar status as those muscles located there. They're going to function together. Okay, so this is a person standing sideways. All right, so let's start simple. Let's name the muscles that you think would be anatomically located in those regions. Okay, all right, so if we could do these first, because I have a brown marker. Okay, all right, so I'm thinking the lats. You know, the lats come down through here, right? That's one group. The erector spinae. Quadratus lumborum might be in that area. Those little short segment groups that we've mentioned. We've got transverse group in there, that transverse spinalis group. Pretty decent list. Make sense? All of those muscles probably end in somewhere. They either originate in there or they stay in that area. Correct? Okay. What muscles do you think are located here in the front of the pelvis, down into the front of the thigh here? Quads. Okay, specifically, which one kind of attaches up here? Rectus femoris. Good. What else? SOS. TFL. Yep. Sartorius. What else? Somebody say something?
External rotators.
Okay, so I'm thinking the external rotators might be more back in this area. That's a pretty decent list. Those are basically your hip flexors, right? I mean, pretty much every one of these is a hip flexor. What are these pretty much? Yep. Back. Yep. Trunk extensors. what muscles are in here? Glutes for sure.
Hamstring.
Hamstrings. Yep. Okay, these are also your hip extensors, right? Does that make sense? What's in there? Abdominals, sure. Trying to figure out what to write. And then your obliques in there. Sure. Okay, so this is, what do we call this lower? Okay. Let's finish the upper ones there, and we're gonna start talking about this, how this relates to the question. Okay, I'm not gonna ask you to label them. Thank goodness, right? Okay, let's go up into the, all right, what muscles do you think are located in the front of the chest here?
Pec major.
Pec major, pec minor, right? Major, pec minor. We don't have to list them all, but these are major ones. Definitely. Right? I think the lats also, don't they kind of come like this up into the front? Yeah, the lats in there. Pretty good. There's no major muscles up in that area. Okay, all right. What muscles are back here? I'm running out of colors. Occidentals. Anything else?
Upper trap.
Upper trap. Trap runs back there. Levator scapula kind of runs back there. Another one that runs back there is sternocleidomastoid. Right? It starts back here and runs up to there. Make sense? That's a pretty decent list. Okay. What muscles do you think would be up here kind of in the front of this? Yeah, I'm out of color, so.
SCM.
Okay, I'm thinking SCM is here. It kind of runs like this. This is the upper part of the front of your neck.
Longus coli.
Yeah, there we go, these crazy ones. Longus coli. Longus capitis.
Scaling.
Yeah, I'm thinking scalenes are here. This is that rectus capitis. Anterior. And then rectus capitis lateralis. Sense? Okay. All right, so let's finish this out. What would be in here? There, here come your scalenes. So sternocleidomastoid, scalenes. That's probably the group I'm thinking of. Make sense? Okay. And then, what muscles are back here? Yeah, I think, what was it?
Splenius capitis.
Okay, splenius capitis.
Cervix.
I think it's services back here, capitis is probably higher. Splenius capitis up there, I want to do the same color. It's gonna be confusing. Splenius capitis. You'll get better at this. I know if you're looking at it, it's like, how do you know that with there? Right? Okay. And then, like right in here, I'm thinking like lower traps, middle traps, right? Probably should have used blue all the time. Probably should have put, oh well. Run out of these colors. Let's go lower traps. Okay, that's quite a bit of muscles that we've listed. And we pretty much thought this is pretty much where they're kind of located. All right, we might be off a tiny bit, okay? But this is a good way to speculate as to, based on a posture, what you think the status is of a muscle. Remember, posture does not, so if I look at somebody's posture and they have a forward head, I cannot guarantee that certain muscle groups are tight, correct? Why? Because posture is, it's habitual, it's a behavior. So it's possible for all of my muscles to be completely normal length, but I might just choose to stand like this because it's the most comfortable position, so I've been standing for 20 years, didn't know it was a problem, okay? Or I could be standing like that because muscles are so tight that I can't stand any other way. So posture doesn't tell you if a muscle is tight, but it might make you think, hey, there's a good chance that muscle could be tight. If that muscle's tight, then that muscle must be tight. If that one's tight, then the one down here must be tight. So we know that this is what we would see if we were to break the body up into quadrants. Okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a scenario or a posture, and you're going to tell me the status of some of these muscles. Okay? All right, so we would assume every muscle in a normal person who stands like that, everything is the length it's supposed to be, because that's what we want you to stand like. Okay? Just because the person doesn't stand like that doesn't mean these are tight. It just means we might want to question whether they're tight, and we may want to check them. Right? And if we find out, hey, these are not tight, quit standing like this. You don't have to stand like that. Okay? All right, so if we had a posterior pelvic tilt, correct? So if this person were to be standing like this, the pelvis is tilted posterior, so the ASIs are behind the pubic symphysis, further than we would like to see it. You tell me what the status is of this quadrant. Tight. They're short and tight, correct? Makes sense? Okay, here's what we know. If those muscles are tight, guess what else should be tight? Those. Right? They work together. If these are tight, think about it. They'd pull up on the front of the pelvis. If these were tight, they'd pull down on the back. There's a good chance if these are tight, those are tighter than they should be. If they weren't, then you're just standing like that because that's how you've chosen to stand. Right? Make sense? Okay, if this is tight and this is tight, what's the status of this quadrant? Not just weak, but lengthened. Okay? Just because something is short doesn't mean it's strong. Right? Something that's lengthened, we would assume it's weak, but things that are short could be weak too. Flexibility has nothing to do with strength. Right? Flexibility is just how long can the muscle be lengthened. It has nothing to do with strength. So I know we have a tendency to say strong, right? But what we're really thinking of is lengthened or short. Which ones are tight, which ones are stretched out too far. Right? So if this is short and this is short, then these must be longer than normal. Because if they weren't, how in the world would that have moved? Make sense? So all of this based on quadrants. So you stand with the posterior pelvic tilt, I can naturally assume there's a good chance your glutes, hamstrings, and hip external rotators are tight, right? I can assume that your abdominals are probably tighter than normal, which means it might limit your extension a little bit. I could assume that your hip flexors, right? We're doing posterior pelvic tilt. They're probably a little bit lengthened, right? You might have a little more hip extension than normal. You might have a little less tightness in your hips when we looked at your flexibility, right? The erector spinae may be a little bit lengthened. So if I'm looking at a treatment to try to correct somebody's posterior pelvic tilt, give me two treatment options. We could stretch the tight ones. We could stretch these, and what would we probably want to do with these? Strengthen those. Right? First, I'd prove to myself that I'm not just looking at their posture and saying, okay, we'll just strengthen these and stretch these. What if they're not the problem? What if it's just how they stand? You're wasting your time. It's not skilled. Okay? All right, so this is what we know. What if it was an anterior pelvic tilt? So which quadrant is tight with an anterior pelvic tilt? One. These are tight. Think about this. What movement do you see at the hip? Is that hip flexion or hip extension? My hip's in flexion, right? So if the hip flexors are tight, wouldn't they pull my hip into flexion? What's happening to my lower back when my pelvis goes forward? It's what? we'll get you get on it. What happens when my pelvis goes forward? You said this would be tight and these would be tight. So what do I have excessive of in my lower back? Extension, which we call lordosis when it comes to the spine, right? So this person with an anterior pelvic tilt is going to have excessive lordosis, right? And some of you guys have that. Your pelvis is tilted forward. Probably not as extreme as I'm trying to exaggerate it to be, right? You're probably more like this, okay? But if that's you, there's a good chance your hip flexors are tight and your lower back muscles are tight. What do you think the status is of your abdominals? Lengthened? And your glutes and hamstrings? Lengthened, right? I could check the flexibility out of those, and sometimes it's right. So if that's the case, we need to stretch the tight stuff, strengthen the lengthened stuff, okay? All right. What would happen if you had an increase in thoracic kyphosis? So this area looks like that. Sometimes we say it's an increase in thoracic kyphosis. We might say it's rounded shoulders, forward trunk. That's essentially what we're meaning, right? All right, so you tell me, what's the status of these muscles for somebody that's standing like this? Tight. These are tight. What are those? Lengthened. Right? So what do you want to do with this person? Like, man, I have shoulder pain. Right? Honestly, that lady yesterday, she had some tightness in her pec minor and pec major. Lats were tight. She didn't have full range of motion. Right? So what do you think we should do here? Stretch this, right? Stretch the pecs, stretch pec minors. First off, we got to make sure that's why they're standing like that, and it was partially why she might have a little bit of this forward. She really wasn't that bad, but she did have some tightness there. Okay? And then strengthen the lower traps, mid traps, rhomboid, the things that would pull back. Right? Okay, let's go into the neck. Pay attention to this one. Okay. The forward head. Alright, I'm exaggerating it. Nobody really stands like that. Well, some people do. Okay, alright, so with a forward head means that this is going to come forward, and that's going to do that, right? The lower cervical flexes, the upper cervical extends with a forward head, or what we call protracted, right? A protracted cervical spine or a protracted neck will give you a forward head, because your head is attached, so your head is definitely going to come forward, okay? So the lower cervical spine flexes, the upper cervical spine extends. All right, so let me ask you, what's going to happen to the scalenes and sternocleidomastoid if this were to come forward? Be tight or lengthened? Tight. Okay, if they're tight, you see if it comes forward, they're going to be put in a short position. They're going to be tight. What's going to happen to those then? Tight. This and this are in the same quadrant. Okay? Makes sense?
So they're both going to be tight.
Most likely. Sternocleidomastoid runs through there. Make sense? If you go back and look at each of these individual muscles, we talked about every one and said if that was tight, what would it do? And what it's doing is what I'm telling you now. Okay? If you can sort of somehow not create a memory of every one of these muscles, but generally get an understanding of where these muscles are located. Okay? Your extended response question is, I'm going to give you a position. I'm going to say this person has anterior pelvic tilt of their pelvis. They have excessive lumbar lordosis. They have a increase in thoracic kyphosis. They have a forward head. And then I'm going to list 10 muscles. And I'm going to say, tell me what's the status of that muscle. Is that muscle tight? Is that muscle lengthened? Which one? Or there's one option where there's not enough information to tell. So if it was like your fingers, there's not enough information to tell. I didn't describe anything in the elbow. So there's no way to tell what the elbow is unless I told you the position of the elbow. Okay? So pretty much, those would be the muscles that are listed. Okay? Now there's more than 10 on there, so they're not all on there. Okay? All right. So does it make sense why these are tight with a forward head and why these are tight? I'm getting some blank stares. We're either spent or we don't get it. I have no clue. Spent? A little bit of both. Okay.
The CM is messing with me
is it?
The SCM's.
Yeah, so think about where it attaches, from the mastoid to the clavicle, right? The clavicle is probably right about here. So it literally runs through 2 quadrants, which is why when you have a forward head, I can tell you the sternocleidomastoid is likely very tight. Because it's the very one that will extend your upper and flex your lower. Like, I don't know how it could not be tight. Okay, your scalings are down here, coming off the vertebrae, right? And coming down here and attaching to your ribs. They're likely to be tight because when that bends forward, that shortens these.
So these are pulling forward and then you're.
Yeah, these little muscles right here.
Backward and that's why it's
If
retracted.
they pull forward, the lower part of my cervical spine will come forward. And this will stretch up, right? Because I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna look at the ground when I'm trying to walk forward. You can see how this could be a problem, right? Right? That'd be a problem, wouldn't it? So everybody's gonna adjust. You're gonna do this. I told you, your eyes will be up. Okay? I've seen people that walk like this because they've got something wrong with their neck up there and they cannot extend their neck. It's a problem. It throws their balance off, throws everything off. Okay? Alright, so if these are short, these are short. Alright, if these are short, what are these? Lengthened. Wouldn't that make sense? The muscles in front of my upper neck here are stretched out when my neck hyperextends like that. Right? So these muscles are commonly weak. First off, I can tell you that your example in the test is going to have a forward head. Because I've never seen anybody with a reverse forward head. I don't see anybody walking around like this. I haven't seen that ever. It's always a forward head. If we're lucky, they're neutral, and we don't have to worry about it. 99.999% of the time they have a forward head. Sometimes it's minimal, and sometimes it's so extreme that I'm like, I need to push your head back on your neck. Right? It's rolling off on the floor. You see anything in between there. Okay? So we know the example is going to have a forward head. So tightness, tightness. Lengthen and lengthen. Right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Kyphosis, thoracic kyphosis. These are lengthened. These are tight. Anterior pelvic tilt. Which quadrant is tight? This one and this one, right? The muscles here. You don't have to know this is lower quadrant 1. I was just trying to say that this quadrant and this quadrant are the same. Make sense? We don't call that lower quadrant 1 and upper quadrant 2. We don't have numbers and letters. What I'm telling you is when I look at somebody's posture, this is what's going through my head. Anterior pelvic tilt, I want to check the hip flexors. Right? Posterior pelvic tilt, I want to check the hip extensors and I want to check the abdominal status. I need to check the erector-spinae group to see if they're really weak or if this person has just chosen to stand like this. They got back pain and they walk in like this. Right? I'm like, I gotta check I mean, I usually watch them walk and say, oh my God. Like, I gotta check and see how strong these muscles are. Why are they not holding your pelvis up? Right? Are your abdominals that tight? Right? That this isn't strong enough to counteract that? Right? Are your glutes and hamstrings that tight? I see people that walk in like this, they look like ducks. Right? Or penguins when they walk. They got their external rotators are so tight, the glutes are so tight, they're like, my back hurts. And I'm like, oh my God, it's making my back hurt. Like, stand up straight. Right? They may not be able to. They might have so much tightness. Okay? Very common. All right. We will very likely have to hit this again. Right? Okay, so maybe take a picture of that. Think about it a little bit. Again,